Every once in a while, it occurs to me, there are a few members of the human race who do not live on the planet Earth. It's been that way now for nearly 18 years. That's how long people have been living in space, orbiting the Earth in shifts, of course, on the International Space Station. Scott Kelly spent 340 days straight there. That's the longest stretch so far by any American. And when he came to town to promote his book, well, this was a guy we really wanted to meet.
And I actually wasted the first 13 years of my education looking out the window.
When you read his book, Endurance, you find out a lot about Scott Kelly, about how he was a disinterested, distracted student, and how the book about the Mercury astronauts, The Right Stuff, sent him on a path to become a naval fighter pilot, a test pilot, and an astronaut. And then how he was chosen to spend nearly a full year on the International Space Station, while his identical twin brother Mike remained on Earth as a control. And there were some interesting changes noted on the genetic level that are still being studied. But what NASA really wanted to know was in what ways a year in space might damage a human being, and how that would have to be addressed before sending people off to Mars. And Scott Kelly's year in space would be no walk in the park. When we see the space station, it looks like this beautiful floating object. When we see you guys doing spacewalks, it looks so peaceful. There's a heck of a lot more involved than that sense of tranquility.
Yeah, absolutely. The space station, it's not only our home when we're living in space, but it's also our workspace. It's a laboratory, it's a garage, it's a living room, dining room, it's a bathroom.
And of course, you do have your privacy. There's a little door, so other people know that you're in there.
So, like those kind of, facilities on Earth, they're not always especially when you have people living in them, they're not always the nicest places. It is a magical place. But I think maybe the way I described it in the book is different than, like you said, than what your impression of it was. And then, of course, the spacewalks are not peaceful.
No, that's what struck me, is how difficult. Tell me what a stress or strain, physical strain, doing a spacewalk is. Because again, you don't see it from the outside.
They've in the pool when we practice them, which is actually easier than what you do in space. They measure our metabolic rate, and we expend more energy than if you run a marathon. So it's work. I don't think they should call it space walking. They should call it space working. And because of the suit and the way it's designed and how the joints move and it's pressurized and how difficult it is to work with in the gloves, it's a real chore.
And you're spent afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And not only physically, but also emotionally, because you're outside in space in a vacuum. You realize, at least at some point, I realized while I was doing this that it's just you and your spacewalking buddy out there, and there's no one to help you if anything goes wrong.
Now we're going to take you Zenith. Here we go.
Everything going.
Spacewalks are fascinating to watch, but most of the other chores they have are not. Their days are full of routine and sometime emergency maintenance, and overseeing many, many experiments, some for NASA about space travel, and others for scientists who want their experiments carried out in a near-weightless laboratory. Being on the space station is a job.
Yeah, and that's why we're up there, to figure all this stuff out.
Part of an astronaut's job is instructing, educating, and entertaining those of us on Earth, like when Kelly and his crewmates sampled lettuce grown on the space station. And this sort of thing is also good PR.
Hi, this is Scott Kelly aboard the International Space Station. I wanted to...
NASA is streaming video, often live, 24 hours a day from the space station. In addition to everything else, astronauts have to be good at this. And like everything else they do, it is tightly scheduled. I guess I never realized. I knew you were up there doing stuff, but I didn't know how much and how busy you really were.
Yeah, people don't realize that, right before that interview, you've probably been scrambling, for the first 6 hours of the day, just trying to keep up with the timeline. And then you set up the camera. It takes you like a minute to point it in the right direction. You show up in your spot like 30 seconds before you go live, and as soon as it's done, you're off to the next thing.
So I'm inside. It's sort of like a little phone booth, but it's pretty comfy. I've got a sleeping bag right here that we sleep in, so we don't have sort of like a little bit of a cover. We don't fly all over the place.
Kelly includes in his book brief descriptions of dreams he had while in orbit, sleeping in a place with no gravity, no up or down, because psychologists and psychiatrists were curious, so they asked him to write them down.
And it really took an effort for me, and it took me a little bit of a while to get into the habit of waking up and immediately writing down what I dreamt. And it was interesting because in the beginning, when I first got up there, I dreamt, mostly like I did on Earth. As I was in space longer, they developed, evolved into more just space dreams all the time. And then as I got close to coming back to Earth, they became more Earth-centric dreams. So I don't have many dreams about being in space now. I probably occasionally I do, but I don't write them down.
Although Kelly is now a retired astronaut, he and his brother are still being tested to determine any long-term effects his time on the space station had on him. The 340 days would be more than enough time for a trip to Mars. So what do you think? I know you've been asked a million times about a Mars mission. Do you see that this is a doable thing from a human and from a technological standpoint?
Yeah, I think, there's a few things we need to know more about or be able to do better. As an example, we need to be able to protect the crew from radiation. I think our life support systems need to be a little bit more robust than what we have on the space station. But that's why we have the space station, to figure this stuff out and understand how to make better systems. But it's more, and I'll steal from my brother what he says, going to Mars is not about rocket science. It's about political science, meaning we need the support in Congress, we need the money to do that. And I think if we're going to go to Mars someday, I think what would help is if we had members of Congress that, not necessarily all of them, but just more people that were, had a science and engineering background versus, the kind of folks we currently have.
In his book, Scott Kelly describes one blunder he made, which fortunately did not put anyone in danger. On a spacewalk, he had left a brake on a moving part, and he had to do an extra spacewalk to get back out and free it up. You're so well trained in so many things and knowing all of these systems, and yet the chance of human error is always going to exist.
Oh, human error is one of the most, is like the most significant reason we have accidents in aviation. As if you use aviation as an example, almost all the time there's a crash. It's because someone messed it up. And I wanted this book to not only be about the great things and to talk about how magical and spectacular space is, but I also wanted it to be a human story. So admitting mistakes, telling whether it's in space, mistakes by me, or even in my personal life, or just things that are not. I think that a lot of other astronaut biographies don't have in them, I thought was helpful, because then it shows the whole story, not just the good stuff.
Nice and free, I can turn it with my hand, so that looks good.
Okay, nice work.